This picture belongs to Azerbaijani woman, a trans woman from 2021 in June. So while the whole world is celebrating their Pride months and having this kind of demonstrations and celebrating their rights to be known, Azerbaijan was experiencing the crackdown against LGBTs. Several gay people, several trans women, trans men received attacks by unknown people. Trans women were evicted from their houses by policemen. And this is one of the pictures that we have obtained. It's a skull fracture that is dent inside, and this is caused by a cis man hitting a trans woman. The main victims of this attacks were trans women. The main victims of these attacks were trans women and gay men. And this picture is actually a great way to show things while actually not really showing a lot of bloody pictures that may make some people very uncomfortable. And I would like to start from 2017 cases, which is also has an importance for Azerbaijani LGBT community. As you could see, it's actually was covered by a lot of media sources. So there's a Washington Post, there's a New York Times, there's a Radio Liberty, a lot of international organizations as well commented. So what happened in 2017? In 2017, more like close to 100 LGBTs, mainly trans women, were actually detained and later arrested by police officers. And they were detained while they were on the road, like just walking in the city center or from their houses, and they were subject to forced examination, medical examination. They were tortured, they were raped, and their hairs were shaved. It's sexual to way to insult trans women, and as well as they were electrocuted. Then these people, about like 56 of them were sentences from 10 to 30 days of prison, and 18 of them fined, and 9 of them received notice. But according to the official numbers, it's 86, but we are suspicious of like close to 100 people being detained for that reason. And this is actually one of the statements of a person that was actually received this kind of treatment as well. And as you could see, just read it, and this treatment and these tortures were very awful and were very frustrating, because after the lawyers started to like ask the police officers, prosecutors officers, the courts to investigate it, nobody investigated this kind of tortures. So in that sense, the government, Azerbaijani government, deliberately violated its negative and positive obligations. Now 25 of them are waiting for a decision at European Court of Human Rights. The reason there is 25 of them is because we couldn't actually collect all of the cases. The reason for that, people after this incident, LGBT started to run from the country, started to hide, and started to not trust anyone. Even now, when we were taking their statements for the just satisfaction of the European Court of Human Rights cases, they were telling us that we can't really go to police and report anything because we are afraid that this is going to happen again, which is actually did happen again in 2021 when, as you could see, RFSL and civil rights defenders, and at the same time ILGA and Norwegian Hostel Committee gave a statement altogether about this issue as well. There was people who were like attacked at night, and when they were attacked this time, the attacks were different. It weren't executed by the police officers, but executed by the ordinary people that were like in a civil uniform. So we couldn't know if they were police officers or not. But when they attacked LGBTs, they were using a lot of words like insult words and curse words, targeting their gender identity. When looking at the legislation of Azerbaijan, which is a very important thing, the LGBTs, like the same-sex relationships, actually decriminalized in 2000s. But it still doesn't protect them, because all the law, all the legislation have the wording of having like just men and women, just heteronormative wording. And you could see it on the constitution, you could see it on the law on ensuring equality of gender, you could see it on administrative offenses, and etc. Also, when you look at the criminal code, article 283, the hate speech doesn't say the gender. So even though there's a lot of hate speech, a lot of hate crimes against LGBTs, there is no investigation started when there's a complaint is sent. The recent event will be, there's a journalist whose name is Sevinç Hüseyinova, and was spreading this kind of hate speech on internet, and a lot of trans women complain about them, but the officials didn't start an investigation, just saying that there is no wording on like a word of gender on hate speech article of criminal code. So they didn't start any kind of investigation. And as a result of this journalist spreading hate speech, one trans woman was burned alive and found like that. It has a lot of terrible consequences that's not even touched. At the same time, Azerbaijan also not ratified the Istanbul Convention, and mostly the reason that's brought for not ratifying the Istanbul Convention is Article 14, which requires states to have teaching materials on non-stereotyped gender roles on their schools, on their universities, and etc., which is considered not culturally appropriate by Azerbaijanis. At the same time, when we look at the new National Action Plan on Gender Equality, that is from 2019 to 2024, it again emphasizes gender as a man and woman. So, like when I am asked if there is any like what does legislation say about LGBTs and their rights, I will just say like it doesn't say anything. Which is a problem. It just looks at it as a men and women. And starting from here, I would like to continue with Visala Hadieva, who's a trans woman from Azerbaijan, and she's going to speak in Azerbaijani language because unfortunately, because of the situation, we couldn't. There is no trans woman who knows English, and which also shows that how they're treated, how cannot receive like appropriate education. And so she's going to speak in Azerbaijani and I will translate her. Visala, buradasan? Başlayabilirsen. İstersen sesini aç.
Sesim gelir.
Aha, gelir. Başla.
Deməli, mən ilk öncə ondan başlamaq istərdim ki, bizim səhiyyə sistemi MKB-11 adlı beynəlxalq klassifikasiyanı tanımadığı üçün, yəni bunu nə rəsmi, nə qeyri-rəsmi formada tanımır və icra etmədiyi üçün Azərbaycanda translar ən təməl hüquq olan transition hüququndan məhrumdular. Yəni bu o demək olur ki, biz məsələn hormonal terapiya üçün və yaxud transitionın digər etapları üçün tibbi xidmətlərdən daha doğrusu məhrum olunmuşuq.
So she's saying that because Azerbaijani government does not recognize international standards of the international organization's health treatment of trans women and transgenders, they cannot receive appropriate hormonal therapy. They cannot receive any kind of appropriate therapy for being a transgender.
Və məsələ, problem ona gətirib çıxarır ki, siz sadəcə dövlət xəstəxanalarını və özəl xəstəxanaları gəzərək endokrinoloqlarla tək-tək danışmalısınız və əgər bəxtiniz gətirirsə, siz hansısa bəlkə trans-friendly bir endokrinoloq tapırsınız və o endokrinoloqla bəlkə hormonal terapiyaya başlayırsınız. Lakin problem burada bitmir. Deməli, bizdə tip tədrisində də əvəzləyici hormonal terapiya normal tədris olunmadığı üçün bu şəxs çox güman ki, bəxti bizə o qədər gətirməlidir ki, xarici təhsil almış biri olmalıdır ki, onun hormonal terapiya ilə bağlı hər hansısa təcrübəsi olmuş olsun.
It is very hard to find a medical personnel to start a hormonal therapy, which actually requires to have a medical personnel to be able to examine. You need to find someone who received education abroad, because there is no medical education on trans women receiving hormonal therapy in Azerbaijan.
Və əgər bütün bunlarda bəxtimiz gətirib və endokrinoloq tapmışsa, trans-friendly olan biri, yəni işini bilən biri, bununla da problem bitmir. Çünki məsələn, male to female transların gündəlik istifadə etməli olduğu hormonal preparatlar Azərbaycanda satılmır. Bunların əsas 4-dən 3-ü Azərbaycanda satılmır. Satıldığı vaxtlarsa istehsal qiymətindən 4-5 dəfə baha satılıb. Belə halda siz sadəcə Türkiyə, Rusiya və yaxud Ukraynadan, yaxın ölkələrdən hardansa bu dərmanları sizə kimsə gətirməli olur. Bu da daha böyük problemlərdən biridir.
Even though you find a medical personnel to help you for the hormonal therapy, you still need to find the medicines. They're not sold in Azerbaijan, and just one of them is sold in Azerbaijan, which is can be used for cis women as well. And if it is sold, it's gonna be 4 or 5 times more expensive, and you also need to bring them from abroad for other countries, from neighborings.
Mənim növbəti əsas problem mənə gəlir ki, mənim polis zorakılığı ilə bağlı və ümumiyyətlə zorakılıqlarla bağlı problemdir. Biraz əvvəl müzahilənin də söz açdığı məsələlərə əlavə olaraq, məsələn, mənim özümə də partnyorumla birlikdə 1 ay əvvəl hücum olunub və mənim halımda, mən şəxsi təcrübəmdən desəm, mən polisdə belə müraciət edə bilmədim. Çünki əslində bu faktı səsləndirmək istəmirəm. Sadəcə müxtəlif səbəblərdən biz bir çox hallarda polisə belə müraciət edə bilmirik. Bu həm qorxudan ola bilər, həm müxtəlif səbəblərdən. Yəni, sən hansısa həmin insanlara necə deyim, legal yolla hansısa onları məsuliyyətə cəlb eləməyin belə həmişə real deyil bu ölkədə.
And I also want to touch upon the police violence in Azerbaijan against LGBTs. That just some months ago, me and my partner also was attacked on the street, and we couldn't actually go to police and complain about that. There's a lot of reasons that LGBT, especially trans women, does not complain to police. Is we are really afraid of police, and we don't also think that it's going to be investigated at all.
Və ən əsas problemlərdən biri də sosiallaşma və işlə bağlı problemdir. Çünki Azərbaycanda translar ümumilikdə və xüsusilə də trans qadınlar əmək hüququndan de facto məhrumdular. Bu konstitusiyada haradasa göstərilməyib ki, trans qadınlara iş verməyin, lakin yəni əksi də göstərilməyib. Çünki necə deyim, diskriminasiya əleyhinə qanun olmadığına görə insanlar bundan iş verənlər bundan istifadə edirlər və xüsusən də bundan məhrum olan məhz trans qadınlardır. Çünki digər LGBTQ+ fərdləri necəsə hansısa yollarla çox az hallarda iş tapa bilirlərsə belə, Azərbaycanda siz nə xidmət sektorunda, nə özəl sektorda işləyən trans qadın bircə nəfər belə olsa tapa bilməzsiniz. Mən hər halda belə bir fakt eşitməmişəm indiyə kimi.
Another problem is trans women socializing and finding job, which is very hard in Azerbaijan because even though there is nothing against trans women being employed on the constitution, or also nothing favoring the trans women being employed, there is no discrimination law that protects trans women in Azerbaijan. Even though other LGBTs can be able to protect their identity, to actually hide their identity, trans women cannot, because it's shown different gender on their ID cards. So I don't know anyone who is a trans woman and is working in public or private sector.
Və eyni zamanda da trans qadınlar üçün yeganə iş seçimi kimi məcburiyyət də bu sex working-dir və onlara da yəni bu məsələn necə deyim işlə məşğul olmağa icazə verilmir çünki bu iş legallaşdırılmayıb və eyni zamanda da problemin əsas kökü də ondan ibarətdir ki, əgər siz Azərbaycanda trans qadınsınızsa və müxtəlif səbəblərdən seks işçisi olmaq istəmirsinizsə, sizin üçün heç bir alternativ yoxdur və bu alternativin yaradılması üçün də nə dövlət tərəfindən, nə QHT-lər tərəfindən bütün bu illər ərzində heç bir addım atılmayıb.
Another problem is because there is no alternative and options for working for trans women is they're forced to work as a sex worker, which is criminalized by Azerbaijani legislation. And there is no job opportunities for trans women that's created by NGOs or the government organization.
Və burada qeyd etdiyim bir məsələ də var ki, deməli sənəd problemləri, sənədlərin dəyişdirilməsi xüsusilə problematikdir. Çünki sadəcə seçim olaraq sizə şəkil dəyişməyə icazə verirlər ki, siz faktiki halınızda şəkil çəkdirə bilərsiniz. Lakin bu asan xidmət mərkəzi, hansı ki bu proseduru həyata keçirən dövlət orqanıdır. Orada siz müxtəlif maneələrlə qarşılaşa bilərsiniz və müxtəlif qeyri-etik atraksiyondan keçməli olacaqsınız. Bu qapıdakı gözətçidən tutmuş sizə sənədi təqdim etməli olan şəxslərə, konsultantlara qədər davam edəcək. Bu bütünlükdə ümumiyyətlə biabırçılıqdır.
Another problem is actually changing your ID card, which you are only allowed to change your pictures. And if also you want to do it, you're gonna see a lot of obstacles. You have to go to the Asan Khidmat, which is a government organization that's working on it. And from the entrance, the guard to the officials that should help you on that matter will create a lot of obstacles on the basis of discrimination.
Mənim qeyd etdiyim məsələlər vaxt çərçivəsində sadəcə bunlar idi. Lakin yəni problemlər bununla bitmir və kifayət qədər çox uzun saatlarla Azərbaycanda transların yaşadığı problemlərdən danışmaq olar. Növbəti, yəni əgər sual və s. olacaqsa mən elə davam edəcəm. Çox sağ olun.
I thank you all that because of the time frame I have to stop here about talking about trans women's problems in Azerbaijan, but there's a lot and like it will take hours. But I'm happy to answer questions at the end of the session. So that's why now I'm going to invite Turna to talk about journalism and to talk about media coverage of LGBTs in Azerbaijan.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Shala, for inviting me for such an important topic. I will try to show the general picture about Azerbaijani media and how LGBTIQ people are being portrayed. I've been working in the field of media around 15 years, and I often covered LGBTIQ people's stories, including 2017 crackdown. And last year, I initiated a platform called Queer Radar, which monitors hate speech against LGBTIQ in Azerbaijani media. We have published 2 reports about this issue. Historically, portrayals of LGBTIQ people in Azerbaijani media have been negative. They reflected intolerance and hate speech towards people. But starting from 2010s, there has been a slight shift in the coverage, and we can explain this with the emergence of activism and rights organizations focusing on LGBTQ people. So I'll briefly introduce main characteristics of Azerbaijani media when they cover LGBTI people's stories. In 2020, we monitored 412 stories, news articles, interviews, and opinion pieces in 23 media outlets. Only 30% of them can be considered acceptable, while 70% was negative approach. the main characteristics of the media is like creating a negative image of LGBTQI people. There are dismissive tone, discriminatory language, term, or discrediting approach towards people. The results of the monitoring shows that people are often sensationalized by using the words shock, scandal in the headlines and creating scandalous context. Media reinforces negative perceptions in the society. In most cases, incorrect and inappropriate terms and expressions are used. For instance, Mavi, which means blue in Azeri, sexual minorities, non-traditional orientation, etc. When describing LGBTQI people. We have seen cases where LGBTQI people mentioned as illness or associated with the illness. For instance, almost every single story in the mainstream media about HIV somehow mentions homosexual people in their story. I can give, for instance, this example. The website Sputnik.az has a news about HIV statistics, and the headline was the following. They have become a headache for us. They are spreading a deadly virus. When you read the content of news, it says that infected, the percentage of infected heterosexuals was around 47, and drug users 41%, and the homosexuals were 6.8%. But still, the homosexuals are depicted more dangerous than heterosexuals, and they use this information in the headline to discredit. There are lots of conspiracy theories in the media about LGBTQI people. One of the most popular theories is based on the idea that a large amount of money flowing to Azerbaijan from the West countries to fund LGBTQI activism. Most of the queerphobic stories have these keywords like West, grants, money. We have calculated this in the report. LGBTIQ activism is described as a Western dictatorship. I will quote from sentence. Western countries have been trying for years to destroy the 1,000-year-old moral values and mentality of Azerbaijani people, but they will certainly not succeed. This is said by Agil Abbas, member of the parliament. He's also a journalist and a member of Writers' Union. This is a common thing for Azerbaijani media. They quote explicitly queerphobic people without even distinguishing their position from them. As this here mentioned about value or moral values and mentality, this is another theory which is being circulated in the media. They say that these people aim to destroy both the traditional family model and the nation. And they are like directly funded from certain people to serve this purpose. And yeah, the media loves such quotes, and they immediately jump into this kind of stories. Our studies show that LGBTQ people are mainly used as a tool to insult political opponents in Azerbaijani media. Political figures try to humiliate their opponents with the words or phrases that refer to LGBTQ, and media uses this moment for the purpose of clickbait. The other issue is inappropriate mention of sexual orientation or gender identity, even there is no need to raise this. For instance, we see stories that has titles like Deputy chairman of X party is homosexual, etc. But we never have seen it like the chairman of party is heterosexual. And transphobia is more dominant in local media. That naming is widely spread. Media persistently uses the names of the person which is written on the ID card. And expressions such formerly male, female, or male-born, female-born are used to describe trans people. Generally, like we see, we don't see LGBTQI people's stories to be reflected from the perspective of equality and rights and freedoms. It's as you know, the media landscape of Azerbaijan is not diverse in terms of finance. There are a handful of media platforms that are not connected to the government. And this says that this hate speech against LGBTQI people comes mostly from pro-government media sources. But recent years, there have been small groups of activists who created their own platform, and they started to share their own voices, and independent media outlets try to follow these standards and adjust their language and attitude. I think that's all from me. I can answer your questions later on. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, thank you, Durna. So now I'm gonna ask Lala to actually present her part. Lala is a representative of Nefes LGBTI+ Azerbaijan Alliance, which is, I'm also a lawyer for these organizations, and we mainly focus on LGBT rights in Azerbaijan. So please, Lala.
I hope you're hearing me well, and I'm saying hello to everyone for your introduction and explanation. It was very interesting for me as well. Yeah, when it comes to, you already covered many issues, but when it comes to LGBT activism and LGBT unions and also NGOs in Azerbaijan, we also know that it's impossible to operate in Azerbaijan as an official NGO level for many reasons, for registration, for many other institutional level reasons. But since 2013, Azad LGBT, Nefes LGBT was working in Azerbaijan as a parallel sister organization, but recently Azad LGBT and Nefes LGBT joined, and they are working together on many LGBT plus issues in Azerbaijan, try to cover and advocate for their rights. When it comes to trans issues in Azerbaijan and Nefes LGBT's work around that, it's of course really hard to work around trans issues because it's mainly these people are the most vulnerable in the community as well. So working with them requires a lot of basically energy, a lot of like activism, a lot of negotiations, networking, because it's really hard to find and really hard to work with this community basically. But when it comes to 2017 crackdown, when already Ajala really talked about and Risala talked about, it was Nefes on the ground with many other activists, LGBT plus activists, going on and following the issue, following with court, with police, what is about their cases, and try to advocate for their rights so they can follow on with their cases and later on to send the cases outside of Azerbaijan to advocate for their cases. And it was basically nefas on the ground, I could say, with the help of pro bono lawyers and pro bono basically activists and many other activists. And the second thing I want to focus on, it's COVID in the world and also in Azerbaijan. Basically, when it comes to COVID issue in Azerbaijan, we never had a national plan on to helping women and including trans women. It was gender blind. I couldn't say there's a plan, but also like it was very gender blind approach to COVID-19 humanitarian aid cases. But during these time, we tried to help few trans people with humanitarian aid. That means some money help, financial help, medical help, and also housing. When it comes to housing, it's the most important issue in Azerbaijan, because basically there's not, trans people cannot live with their families for many reasons, for certain reasons, and they have to live with in transitional housing or in like places that they could rent. But because transphobic approach from other people, even from landlords, they are usually losing their renting rights, basically. So landlords can basically easily evoke them and put them on the street. So it's really, really hard problem, heavy problem that they are facing every day in Azerbaijan. So we could, as Nefes, try to help some of them with this issue, homelessness issue, but it's really hard. And it's really hard to cover many issues that we could cover by this time. When it comes to, and also like I already know that Jala and Avisala talked about medical problems in Azerbaijan, but when it comes to hormonal therapy and many other medical expenses, COVID cases also really, really basically, it was impossible for them to get medical help, any other help outside. And it was really hard. So we could cover some of the expenses during this time, even though it was really hard. Mainly our problem is around, of course, funds. We could increase some funds from our side, from like a donation, and yeah, like this kind of thing around funding and around what is this organizational capacity. It's really hard to work around in Azerbaijan. Also, I could stress on the fact that Nefes tries to advocate for trans rights by supporting, by creating some like issues, uncovering issues basically on the legislation, trying to push and talk about as in legal framework when it comes to issues around reporting from government side to international organizations. So Nefes really tries to include trans rights, include trans issues in those reports and regulations. So Nefes, I could say, really tries to advocate on that as well, about public awareness around these issues. When it comes to talking about rights in media, in public level, also political level, it's very non-existent, as we know that in Azerbaijan, political sphere is really one-sided. Basically, they don't want to support trans rights, LGBT plus rights, including trans rights. And recently, I actually read one of the news that one of the MP in Azerbaijan commented and said that I am not even ready to accept those people. How can I work on basically, or what is creating some sort of law or adding some sort of law around trans issues? People could condemn me, and I am ready, not other people ready, and Azerbaijan society is not ready to basically work on this kind of issues and laws. So like, yeah, that's why Nefes really tries to push on and try to advocate on this level as well. So far, I can cover this. I know that I have only 10 minutes. Yeah, I am open for your questions.
So yeah, now I'm gonna receive the questions from chat that I have some of them, and I'm gonna ask to people that is there directed to. So there is a question actually to Visala, and this question is, do you feel like it has become better or worse for like throughout the years? I would say that's the question. So Visala, are you here? Buradasan Visala. Sual belədir ki, bu illər ərzində necə düşünürsən trans qadınların hüquqları ilə bağlı daha da pisləşib, yoxsa daha da yaxşılaşıb? Belə başa düşürəm ki, hökumətin siyasəti nəzərdə tutulur.
Hökumətin siyasətini götürdükdə və yaxud ümumi vəziyyəti götürdükdə, konkret olaraq, məsələn, şəxsi müşahidələrim üzrə desəm, məsələn, 10 il əvvəldən bu vaxta qədər heç bir qanuni dəyişiklik olmayıb. Nə də, yəni, ümumilikdə götürsək, translar üçün müstəqilliyindən bəri Azərbaycan indiyə qədər hər hansısa bir dəyişiklik olmayıb. Ümumiyyətlə, LGBTQ temasında yeganə qəbul olunmuş qanun homoseksuallığın dekriminalizasiyası haqda qanundur. Başqa isə heç bir dəyişiklik olmayıb və inanmıram ki, ümumiyyətlə bizdə bu tip hansısa dəyişiklik baş versin. Çünki nə dövlətin belə bir niyyəti yoxdur, nə də ki, digər ölkələrin və yaxud da beynəlxalq təşkilatların bu barədə Azərbaycan hökumətinə hər hansısa ciddi pressingi və yaxud da başqa hansısa təzyiqləri yoxdur.
So Visala answered that there is actually nothing getting better because there is no policy on protecting trans women's rights by the government, and this affects all. And she also thinks that there is no actual pressure by international organizations to Azerbaijani government to improve trans women's rights in Azerbaijan. And there is some more questions to. Okay, let me see. So to actually Durna Safarova, and they're asking that how does one spread the situation in Azerbaijan to rest of the world by using media?
Can you repeat it, please? How does
one spread the situation in Azerbaijan to the rest of the world by media, by using media?
I think like recent years, LGBTQI people started to establish their own media outlets or social media platforms, channels, and right now the world, like anyone in the world, can reach easily and communicate easily and get information easily directly from people themselves. On the other hand, local journalists are an important tool to deliver to the world what's going on in Azerbaijan. In this regard, I think LGBTQI activists and media can collaborate, work together, and deliver stories from the ground. I hope I managed to answer.
Yeah, and the next question is actually for Lala. And the question is, can you see any social changes happening for LGBT people in Azerbaijan since you started working with these issues?
I could say there have been some changes from the community level. So before, community was not that visible and active. I'm talking about like 2013, 12, 13, and 14. Around this time, community was not that visible, and they didn't see reason actually to be visible as well, for my understanding. But right now, I can see some active individuals that are coming forward and are really courageous to talk about their rights and others' rights in the community. So definitely, I can see some visibility in the community. It's a big difference for me. But from public sphere, like in civil society, of course, I can note that I can see some activism as well, some kind of understanding and dialogue, creating spaces that offering to come forward and talk about their issues for LGBT people. But I could say in the wider public arena, I still don't see any activism or any talk in the public TV, and or any talk around, like positive talk even, even any talk, or let alone positive talk around that issue in the parliament of Azerbaijan. So I can't say that some of the dialogue or talk even is happening in that sphere. Yeah, that's my observations.
Yeah, I actually observed a lot of stuff on this matter too, because I do remember back in 2017 when the things were happening, it was very hard to find trans women, and it was very hard to actually connect to them. And after all this, while the case is going on at European Court of Human Rights, it's a priority. So we are looking at this case, like the European Court of Human Rights looking at this case in a very early time frame. So it's actually like about 3 years, but because of the pandemic, it's like 4 years, lasted 4 years. After that, so on the last cases that happened in 2021, last crackdown, also about the hate speech to Sevinç Hüseyinova, which is one of the questions that I'm gonna touch upon as well. I've seen on the media that trans women actually going in front of ombudsman, protesting for their rights, going in front of the police stations, protesting for their rights, which I have never seen in Azerbaijan happening. And I do believe these things are happening because when lawyers are actively working on trans women's issues, while we are working on all these cases, we talk to them and we explain them that even though you are told that you're not a human being, even though you are told that you are not worth of life, even though you are told that you don't have any rights, you do have rights and you're a human, and you do have rights that are protected under the European Convention on Human Rights. You are going to receive a judgment that is going to approve that your rights should be protected, that these cases should be investigated, reopened by the government, by the Supreme Court when the decision is made, and they're going to receive a compensation. And it's actually empowering for them, and I can see the results. I can see them going and fighting for their rights, and I do believe that that's because there was a lot of there's a lot of pushing by NGOs. There's actually a lot of there's like very few NGOs, but they're doing as much as they can for trans women, for LGBT community. And there's the other thing that Azerbaijanis activists actually told me to touch upon is Sevinç Hüseyinova's case, which is a journalist blogger and backed by the government, who was spreading a lot of hate speech on Instagram, opening lives and calling people to beat trans women when they see them on the street, especially trans women when they see them on the restaurant. And she was talking that they should be separated, they shouldn't go to the same restaurants to us. And she was also showing the picture of a one trans woman who wore a wedding dress to her birthday and just telling everyone to attack her, and etc. And after that, like because of all this hate speech that is spread on Instagram, that her pictures were showing by Azerbaijani media itself and also Sevinç Hüseyinova itself, this trans woman who wore a wedding dress on her birthday was found burned alive and her hands are cuffed, which is which actually shows how much hate is there, against trans women in the community, in the country, in the society. And also it's actually creates very unsafe station for them. So when you work with them, it's not about you working for freedom of expression or freedom of assembly or association, not this kind of rights that are non-absolute and can be in a way that restricted by the government. But we are working on Article 2, Article 3 on Convention, which means that right to life, right against torture. So it's like a basic rights, just the basic things that are their lack of. And they also try to survive in Azerbaijan by trying to find job, which they cannot. They have to work as a sex worker. They try to even, just walking on the street is very dangerous for them. Even being at home is very dangerous for them. It's seen from 2017 cases. It's since from 2021 Pride Month crackdown. And while we are seeing other countries having Pride Month, celebrating it, having demonstration, even having like a excessive police force against their demonstration on the Pride Month, we can't even think of having any kind of demonstration for LGBT rights in Azerbaijan, because Azerbaijan is not even in that level. Actually, there's an index from ILGA Europe, which is one of the international organizations that is focused on LGBT rights. Azerbaijan is in the last years for 5 years, and it's worse than like all the countries, like a lot of countries that you could imagine of. Then I'm just gonna look into other questions that is given. There is one question.
Also, I have one addition to your
Sure.
comments. Also, like it's not a secret that war happened in Azerbaijan. Basically, last full and a half years rhetoric in Azerbaijan is very patriotic and militarized, and also talks around patriotism, talks around the issue around the land and everything is much higher than any other issue that they are talking publicly on the TV, outside, and everything. So like, of course, wars suppress every other being's rights and everything, and including LGBT rights. I really wanted to stress on that as well.
Yeah, thank you. And there is another question to Visala, that if, like, I guess this question about if they can receive any kind of medical treatment by the hospitals, by the medical professions, personals. So sual belədir ki, əgər yəni bu hormonal treatmentdən əlavə başqa formada bu medical səhiyyədən bir kömək ala bilər. Yəni gedirsiz həkimə sizi necə qarşılayırlar, necə münasibət göstərirlər belə.
Məsələ elədir ki, yəni bir yerdə əgər dövlət yaranıbsa və özünə dövlət deyirsə, bu məsələlər sadəcə hamısı həkimlərin fərdi hansısa seçimləri əsasında baş verməli deyil. Yəni mən kifayət qədər nümunə gətirə bilərəm, hansındakı insanlar nəinki transitiona aid hansısa tibbi, necə deyim, hər hansısa tibbi bir qulluq üçün müraciət ediblər. Sadəcə olaraq insanlar yaralı halda transfobik ataktan sonra müraciət ediblər. Ölkənin ən başlıca tibb müəssisələrindən biri olan Respublika xəstəxanasına, Respublikanski belə adlanır bizim şeydə. Həmin xəstəxanaya o qızlar buraxılmamışdı və yalnız media gələndən sonra onları reanimasiyaya qəbul ediblər. Yəni bu dəhşətin sadəcə, necə deyim, çox belə dəhşətli nümunələrdən biridir. Və mən davam edərəm tərcümənin.
Okay. So Visala is saying that if a state calls off its state, then when the citizens, the people receiving medical help shouldn't be affected by the doctor's own view or opinion on their gender identity, but it's the other way. So she also remembers that when trans woman was wounded, attacked by another person, and she went to the main hospital in Azerbaijan, which is called Respublikanski. It's the Republican hospital, basically. She wasn't allowed to get any medical treatment for her wounds. It was a knife wound, that I do remember that. for her wounds. So after the journalists came and journalists started to videotape it, started to report about that, they were at the end allowed her to be in the hospital and receive a medical treatment, but she was basically bleeding in front of that's actually my addition. She was basically bleeding in front of the hospital and no one was actually allowing her to go inside.
Və ümumilikdə isə götürsəm, məsələn, ötən həftələrdən birində bizdə sadəcə icmada olan insanlar yazmışlar ki, məsələn, bir qıza uroloq lazımdır. Yəni, məsələlər bizdə elə olunur ki, kiməsə uroloq lazımdır, kiməsə kardioloq lazımdırsa, kiməsə göz həkimi lazımdırsa, biz bularaq da sosial mediaya yazıb normal necə deyim, düşüncədə olan həkim tapmalıyıq. Bu gülməlidir, çünki həkimlər, yəni bizdə bu dərəcədə ola bilir, yəni xəstəyə onun, nə bilim, gender identifikasiyası və yaxud orientasiyasına görə hansısa qəbul edə bilərəm, edə bilmərəm kimi, yəni özlərindən şeylər qoya bilirlər və bir çox hallarda da bu hallar daha çox dövlət xəstəxanalarında baş verir. Özəl xəstəxanalarda isə müəyyən bəzi həkimlər, bəzi xidmətlər bəlkə də reallaşa bilər. Dövlət xəstəxanalarında isə bunların hamısı mümkünsüzdür.
So she also added that if we are looking for any kind of doctor, let's say a cardiologist, or for our hearts, for our eyes, or for other organs, body organs, we have to publish it on internet so we could find a doctor that will accept us and that will treat us. Because in all the public hospitals, they usually just say no, and they wouldn't treat us, they wouldn't even accept us or give us an appointment. And that's also the case for some of the private hospitals. So I will just see if there is another question. And as far as I see, there isn't, so I didn't receive any more questions. So I guess that's all. And I actually want to thank Amnesty International Lund for giving us this opportunity to speak up on trans women's rights in Azerbaijan. Because when I'm in Lund, and when I came to Lund, I just realized that as I showed a lot of media resources reported about what happened in 2017, and there's actually two organizations that I know that's situated in Sweden, like Civil Rights Defenders and RFSL, also gave a statement about what happened in 2021. People don't know about it, and it's basically not spoken, not known. And we actually really wanted people in Lund and also in international sphere to know about what kind of difficulties, what kind of discriminations and human rights violations trans women are facing in Azerbaijan. So I guess with that, we could just finish it.
Yeah, and I also want to thank all of you for sharing all of this. And for giving us more of an insight to the massive issues that are in Azerbaijan. It's I didn't know that much before, but now I really feel like I do know more, and that's always one step in the right direction, that more people get acknowledge this for sure. So thank you all for sharing.
I guess we could just stop recording.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah, thank you for listening. Thank you for inviting, first of all, Jala.